You're listening to the CatholicHTowner podcast. I take as my verse for this episode the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, verse 29. And Jesus answering said to them, "You err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God." Hello and welcome to the CatholicHTowner podcast, coming to you from the Bayou City, in the state everyone is moving to. The podcast where evangelizing and catechizing both get Texas-sized personalities. I'm your host, the CatholicHTowner, self-proclaimed theology geek, massive foodie, and nemesis to all things activist. Thank you for listening, and welcome to part 2 of the arguments against religion I'm sick of hearing. In the previous episode, I mentioned how I'd heard the same arguments repeatedly against believing in God. At one point, I said it was the first episode I recorded after the Dobbs case. Some might conclude I'm just piggybacking off the Dobbs ruling like some other people are doing now. I admit a connection does exist, but it's not because of the issues surrounding the case. I've also put this together because I have the sense that a tide is happening in America, where every day more people are waking up to the various lies told to them for years. I wanted not only myself, but also you, the listener, to feel a part of this change happening in America and to take action as well. So, on to the rest of the list. Now, where did I leave off? Yes, I was refuting the idea that Jesus is fictional. Well, some secularists would try to say that if Jesus himself is historical, not fictional, then myth number 5. The Bible itself is fiction. In a way, this myth is stating the following. The Bible may have some nice things here and there and talk about some accurate points, but it has too many fictional parts to take seriously. I then ask you, what parts are you talking about that are supposed to be fictional? The parables? Those illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson. The wisdom books? Those were never fiction anyway. Then there are just the more nonsensical, far out there claims people make about the Bible, such as the Bible claiming snakes and donkeys can talk. Those are not biological claims, and the context where both of those happen show otherworldly beings are involved. The claim the Bible says men have a different number of ribs than women. If you're not familiar with this idiocy, this comes from Genesis. If you're not familiar with this idiotic interpretation, this comes from reading the book of Genesis when God took Adam's rib to create Eve, and we're somehow supposed to conclude the Bible is claiming men have fewer ribs than women, which is of course absolute nonsense in more than one way. Besides, if the Bible itself is fictional, how come you can't find it in the fiction section? You see, ladies and gentlemen, and there are no others, every bookstore and library follows a book category system called the Dewey Decimal System. It is a 10-part system going from 0 to 9. Section 8 of this system is fiction. The Bible is in Section 2 for religion. Notice that Section 2 is nowhere even close to Section 8. People who have pondered book classification for much longer than you and I put together have determined the Bible doesn't belong in the fiction section. But if you're not convinced by that, let me put this another way. Who here has heard of the novel Like Water for Chocolate? It's a romance novel published in 1992. There are parts in it that read like a cookbook. Can I find this in the cookbook section in a bookstore or library? No, I won't. I would see it in the romance novel section. How about George Orwell's 1984? Parts of that read like a journal. Can I find it in the biography section? No, I would find it in political fiction. Lest you think these examples prove nothing, and true story on this. While researching this particular myth, I came across only one instance, just one, of the Bible being placed in the fiction section. It was at a Costco in Simi Valley, California in 2013. When this made the press, Costco admitted it was a mistake and corrected it. There have been no other instances of the Bible being put in the fiction section. I looked up and down. Trust me, this is it. But perhaps by fiction, critics mean that religion operates on wish fulfillment. To paraphrase Sigmund Freud, yes, that Sigmund Freud is the fool that came up with this idea. People wish for the Bible to be true, and thus are under an illusion. Well, to that, I paraphrase C.S. Lewis by saying, you have to show why the Bible is fictional before explaining why it's fictitious. The arguments so far for the Bible being fictional have not held up. Furthermore, I can say, using that same logic, that you don't believe in God because you wish for God not to be true. But if I were to claim that, where would that get us in the grand scheme of things? Consider also this. Would it be wish fulfillment to imagine taking on someone a whole lot bigger and stronger than you are in a fight? Well, why would I wish for something like the Ten Commandments that restricts my behavior? Or a place like hell where I could go for doing wrong? Sure, I can wish that for other people, but why would I ever wish either of those for myself? Or maybe, just maybe, and put on your tinfoil hats for this one, maybe claiming the Bible is fictional is a cover, a dog whistle, if you will, for saying the Bible should not be used as a moral compass for people's lives. No joke, I actually argued with someone who made this exact claim. I then gave him this challenge. If the Bible is not supposed to be used for a moral compass, then what book should be used? Chairman Mao's Little Red Book? The Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom? He had no answer, and he still doesn't. I make no apologies for harping on this for this long, but I'm convinced that just as if Christ had not risen from the dead, our faith is in vain, so too if the Bible is not fiction, then unbelief is in vain. Here's my challenge to anyone who thinks the Bible is fiction. You show me any story that is agreed upon to be a fairy tale, it doesn't matter from what culture or country, and show me where it mentions an actual place with an exact date in history, invokes an overwhelming emotion, has more than 2 authors, contains a call to action and or personal amendment, contains a prediction about the future relative to when the story takes place, and has a history of massive bans or persecutions against it. And with that, we move to myth number 4. Religion has such bizarre beliefs. Atheists are more enlightened. Alright, let's stop right here for just a moment. Did you catch the problem between these two sentences? Here, let me repeat them slowly this time. Religion has such bizarre beliefs. Atheists are more enlightened. Right, now did you catch what's wrong with those two sentences this time? Yeah, I know that sometimes it's hard to pick up on an error, especially when 4 of the same mistake are made in such quick succession. These all have to do with what's called the ambiguity fallacy. It's when you use a word that has multiple meanings, you don't make it clear as to which meaning you're talking about, and you wind up muddling a message. This claim doesn't bother defining in these two sentences what the words religion, bizarre, beliefs, and enlightened mean. Besides, I'm confused. In the previous episode, it was mentioned someone only believes what they believe because of where they were born. Even if that were correct, which it isn't, then who are you to say something is bizarre or not? You can't just dismiss something by calling it odd and not do anything more. That's laziness at best and imperialist at worst. I mean, imagine for a moment if we applied this notion to other things. No, I'm not buying movies or music off streaming. Not having the physical copy is bizarre. Or, no, I'm not reading something in a language that requires reading right to left. That's bizarre. And I'm not even going to start getting into where our food scene would be with this notion. I mean, I can name a spot not far from me that's a fusion of Mexican and Sri Lankan. I would have never thought to do that, but I'm not going to dismiss it just because of the odd idea of it all. I mean, and can we honestly say atheists, skeptics, and secularists aren't without their odd beliefs? Or being atheist and having an odd belief are mutually exclusive of each other? I mean, if we define bizarre as that which does not line up with known facts or reality, and if both polls and secular spokesgroups are to be accepted as true, then that would then mean the majority of secularists believe the phrase separation of church and state is in the U.S. Constitution. Not only is it not there, it doesn't mean what they claim it means. According to polls, the vast majority of atheists believe America is becoming a theocracy. Not only is that not happening, but most Americans don't want that anyway. So this is more of a sniffing for a problem that doesn't exist scenario. The majority of secularists think the phrase under God is unconstitutional, even though every single court case has ruled the opposite. One man even wanted the phrase gone so much he even tried suing on his daughter's behalf over the phrase without checking to see whether he had legal custody of his daughter, which he didn't. Yeah, quick legal lesson here. You can't sue on a child's behalf if you're not that child's legal guardian. According to polls, the majority think atheists make up 20 to 25% of Americans. The real number, depending on survey used, is closer to 2 to 4%. The only way it could add up to a minimum 20% is if you include non-religious. But non-religious doesn't always equate to atheist, so why would you do that? And finally, according to another poll, the majority of secular people think it's okay for children to be transgender. My whole challenge to all of this, and all things surrounding this myth, either admit non-belief is not immune to bizarre stances, or drop the whole only religion has My whole challenge concerning this myth, either admit non-belief is not immune to bizarre stances, or drop the whole only religion has bizarre beliefs thing. And speaking of children, myth number 3. Teaching children religion is brainwashing and or indoctrination. And I want you all to listen to me very closely on this one. Not a single therapist, mental health professional, or mental health governing body would agree with anything this notion just said. No law exists that says that teaching children religion is indoctrination. If we're being honest, the whole thing seems like it doesn't even understand the meaning of the word indoctrination. Another quick side note to this. When I pointed out to someone that no mental health professional would call religious teaching indoctrination, he was willing to admit the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the Bible, if you will, of the mental health community, doesn't list teaching religion as indoctrination, and has never said that in any of its versions. But, he claimed, and I am not making this up, the reason why it doesn't say that, according to him, is because there are Christians on the American Psychological Association's board of directors preventing this from being printed. According to him, if all the Christians were removed, then the truth would finally come out. It's at this point that I would like to point out that, yes, people who are that stupid exist, and I would also like to remind people, conspiracy theories do not make valid evidence. But then again, what do we mean by indoctrination? If by indoctrination you mean that you're teaching people a set of principles or values, then fine. Christianity and other religions of the world do that. But I could just as easily say the exact same thing about the public school system teaching children math. If you're saying by indoctrination, you're teaching kids not to think critically or even question what a religion believes, then no, you're flat out wrong on that. I can name several people in the Catholic tradition alone who at one point in their lives did question something critical about Catholicism and found their own, often profound answers within Catholicism. Another funny story behind this one. I had an atheist activist tell me once that teaching children about religion or instilling religious beliefs in children is just as dangerous as encouraging them to drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes. No, I'm not making this one up either. I then asked him, well, show me the evidence that shows it. I asked him, then show me the evidence that shows religion is just as harmful as cigarettes or alcohol. After all, we do have direct correlative evidence between cigarettes and lung cancer. Well, of course, he didn't provide any evidence, because there is no such evidence. Every single study done about this subject doesn't show any negative side effects or negative consequences of kids learning about religion, apart from maybe some negligible differences here and there that are easily fixed. Every single study done about this subject doesn't show any negative side effects or negative consequences, apart from maybe every single study done about teaching kids religion doesn't show any negative side effects or negative consequences, apart from maybe some negligible differences here and there that are easily fixed by the child's teenage years. I'm tempted to think that either atheists made this whole thing up, or at bare minimum, they're once again sniffing around for a problem that doesn't exist. And are we really supposed to believe that atheists never engage in indoctrination or brainwashing at any point whatsoever? I mean, what do you think the USSR did to children in Russia throughout the entire Cold War? They indoctrinated them into anti-religious propaganda. And I'm not even going to get into what the USSR and the Soviet satellites did to ordained priests. Now I'm going to say a few phrases here, and I want you to really listen to them. Children can just know they're gay or transgender. America is inherently evil. Women make less than men because of the patriarchy. Now explain to me why any of these get a free pass but religious instruction doesn't. I suspect I know what the answer is, and that brings me neatly into the next myth. Myth number 2. You shouldn't impose your beliefs on other people. Another way to phrase this is saying you can believe whatever you want to believe, as long as you keep it to yourself and don't impose those beliefs on others. First, has anyone else noticed that it's the person trying to impose their values that's the one telling others they shouldn't impose their values? After all, secularists and atheists don't seem to have a problem with imposing their views on other people. Secondly, imagine if this was used in other scenarios. Yes, Your Honor, I know I'm on trial for murder, and the prosecution thinks I'm guilty, and if they want to think that, they're free to, but they shouldn't be imposing their beliefs on other people. Or how about this? Officer, you think I was speeding, and you're free to think that, but I don't think I was, and you shouldn't be imposing your beliefs on me. And to answer the question that I'm sure some people may have about this, yes, I do care what you believe. I care if you believe that you can drink bleach. I care if you are convinced that living in filth is just as good as living in cleanliness. I care if you think that we're all in this together, but then you turn around and expect me to cover your sorry hide because you did something stupid and won't man up to it. I care if you think that any of the arguments we've gone through in this particular episode have any bearing as to whether or not God exists, even though if you pay close enough attention to what I've done so far, you'll notice none of them refute God. And the truth is, to any secularist who claims that they don't care about what other people believe, the fact is, you do care. And how do I know you care? Because if you didn't care, you wouldn't be babbling on at the rate you've been saying how much you don't care. Ever heard that old saying about how if you constantly have to remind people how great you are, you probably aren't? Same thing here. And no, I'm not going to bother with any challenge on this myth. There is no challenge that I can come up with or any excuse anyone could come up with that justifies telling others that you shouldn't be imposing your beliefs on others without sounding like a complete hypocrite. Before we get to number 1, here are some bonus statements that I'll touch on in brief. Bonus number 1. Christians hate science. This one was not on the list because it deserves its own episode, but in a nutshell, key foundations of science would not exist were it not for a Christian. And if you think Christians hate science, I have a whole religious order called the Society of Jesus that would love to disagree with you. Bonus number 2. Priests prey on children. Not on the list partially because it falls under the child indoctrination myth, but also because people have woken up to the much worse problem of public school teachers and what some of them do with children. A problem even the Department of Education admits is a serious issue, and little to nothing has been done about it. Then again, public schools promote secularism, so they get a free pass. Am I right? Finally, bonus number 3. Religion will die out in the world. Secularists and militant atheists have been claiming this off and on since the mid-1800s. Here we are, early 21st century, and it still hasn't died out. Projections show Christianity is the most common religious practice in the world, and will remain so for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, atheists aren't growing fast enough to even keep up with world population growth. And finally, myth number 1. Atheism is just not believing in God. Let me make this clear. Am I saying only truly atheists don't believe in God? Yes, I am. If for no other reason that's what the word atheist means. That's not what I'm getting at, though. What I mean is the idea of saying atheism is only about saying God doesn't exist. That's what's wrong with it. Ideas don't exist in a vacuum, and this one is no different. Funny thing about humans and ideas, we tend to share our ideas with others, and we tend to conclude that if our idea is right, then other ideas must be wrong. And another funny thing, we get more ideas from previously established ideas. I mean, consider this for a moment. Is Christianity just belief in Jesus? No. It also comes with various morals, ethics, and a life outlook. Is Islam just the idea there is one God? Again, the answer is no. It comes from supporting the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. Can it then be said atheism is just not believing in God, even in light of the textbook definition? No, of course not. If it were just that, then how do you explain that atheists feel the need to call religious people stupid or ill-informed? Why they feel the need another 10 commandments need to be created, or failing that, denouncing the current 10? Why they feel the need to say that we can be good without God? Can this explain why secular-minded people feel the need to speak out against other people's faith being expressed in the public square? I'm not saying every secularist does this, I'm saying enough do in order to make it worth mentioning. Furthermore, and consider these questions mini challenges. If churches or houses of worship are so stupid, why do atheist churches exist? Again, I'm not saying every atheist is a member, I'm just saying there's a noteworthy contradiction here. Further, doesn't this and both reason rallies fly in the face of saying atheists don't get together to worship nothing? I notice that phrase isn't said anymore. Does this then mean secularism and or atheism come with its own standards of logic and acceptance of evidence? I ask because phrases like what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence both exist, and both those notions are self-refuting. Does atheism come with its own ethics and morality? Again, I ask because by my count, there are at least 10 atheist alternatives to the 10 Commandments. Not all of them have 10 parts to them, by the way, and at least 3 times as many books on secular ethics, all of which contradict each other. Not counting the books on sexual ethics, of course. Finally, what about economics? Not stereotyping one way or the other, but I notice more religious people support capitalism, and more secular people promote socialism. Remind me again, who lost the Cold War? And those are my top 10 notions that I'm sick of hearing concerning religion and Catholicism. If you find some things here that I just said provocative or shocking, then join me next time where we'll go into some of the material I have in my own personal study that helps me reach these conclusions. Until next time. Hi everyone, thank you for listening to my podcast. Follow me on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, visit my YouTube channel, my Rumble page, my Patreon, and visit my website at CatholicHTowner-podcast.castos.com.